Are tariffs a good or bad thing for your small business? We're going to talk about it today on the Good Advice Podcast. That's right. We're getting a little feisty today, talking about some interesting political stuff on the show today. It is a rainy, dreary day here in Northwest Arkansas, which means we might as well talk about something full of optimism on the show. Hey, if you're a first-time listener, my name is Blake Benz. I'm the host of the Good Advice Podcast, and you've come to the right place to learn how to do business better. We're going to talk about quite a few things today, but before we jump in, we have an incredible business that is sponsoring today's podcast episode. Check this out, and we'll be right back soon. Don't forget, you can support the podcast yourself on our Patreon, patreon.com/goodadvice. We'll talk soon. Do you ever feel like your payment processor is robbing you blind? For some of us, it's not blind. We look at the amount of money that's going to our payment processor month after month, and a lot of times we ask ourselves, is there a better way? I'm making good money, yet so much of it isn't actually ending up in my pocket. In the world of payment processing, in many cases, it's a cashless world, so you have to have a payment processor you can really trust. I personally am a big fan of Brad Norwood, who's the owner of PrimePaymentsUSA.com. Brad's a business owner himself. He knows all the challenges that come with running a business. More importantly, he knows the value of an individual customer. See, some of these bigger businesses, they're all about scale. They're all about bringing in as many customers as possible. But do they know your name? Do they know your business? Do they know what's important to you? In many cases, the answer is no. And in worst cases, they're just looking to get as much money from every transaction that you work hard for, which really doesn't feel too good. So you got to reach out to Brad Norwood today and understand how he's doing business and why it can save you money month after month. More importantly, you might even ask him about his zero-fee payment processing that he's offering to a select few of people. Go to PrimePaymentsUSA.com and start putting the money that you worked hard for back into your pocket. All right, it's tariff time. Let's talk about tariffs today. And for my political junkies, for my friends who are addicted to politics, it is part of you would say maybe it's a hobby of yours, not just an area of interest, but you're actively involved and you're also a listener to the podcast. You may be thinking, finally, at last, we're talking about these things that I really enjoy and love. And I hate to tell it to you, I got to be honest, I have misled you with the title of today's podcast episode because we're not really going to talk about tariffs today. We're going to talk about it a little bit. We're going to get into it a little bit today. But there's a greater message that I want to really get at in today's podcast episode. And we're talking about it because, it's not looking great in the world economy right now. There's a lot of FUD. There's a lot of negativity out there. And if you are a small business owner, you may be panicking. You may be wondering. You may be thinking, what the heck does this mean for my business? And I got to tell you, as a millennial, I'm getting a little tired of making these episodes where I talk about things are bad, things are not good. What does this mean for your small business? I've done a few of these over the podcast we've done for 6.5 years now, and I've probably done this kind of episode maybe 4 or 5 times, which if you're a listener to the show and you're a millennial, this is just business as usual. We made it through, the early 2000s. We made it through the recession in 2007, 2008. We made it through COVID. We made it through it being impossible in the 2010s to get a job. This is business as usual for us. This is nothing we haven't been through before. Millennials, I saw a social media comment, and it was some like doomer headline. And the comment on the article was like, as a millennial, I'm not worried about the fear of financial instability because that is our life. We've never really known deep financial prosperity. So like I said, business as usual for many of us. But I do want to talk about tariffs today. It's so funny, by the way, how social media and all this stuff, like, I could very easily be. A lot of people are asking me about tariffs. A lot of people are asking me about what do I think about tariffs. No one has asked me what I think about tariffs. Like, let's get that out in the open. This isn't one of those, well, because people keep emailing me. No, no one has emailed me. I think by now I've had my brand long enough that people just know that I don't really indulge in this kind of conversation. However, I have seen it happen in our Tuesday morning group. I have seen it happen in different networking groups where people talk about, man, I'm uncertain, I'm worried. And really, honestly, being totally candid as someone who's not very political, as a dad, I mean, yeah, I'm concerned for my kids. I'm concerned about their future. And sometimes those feelings are really, they're very real. I think about, am I going to be able to provide the future for them that I want them to be able to have? Am I going to be, are they going to be able to have the opportunities that I would want them to have? These are, and I know I'm speaking about it very quickly and sort of casually, but I'll be honest in that these feelings are existential sometimes and deeply uh, uh, hurtful is not the right word. Like, I find myself almost sort of grieved for their future, thinking like, "Oh my gosh, I'm there's so much negative news out there." And a little bit of a backstory, if you and you might remember this from me, but I shared a podcast episode a couple of years ago. I typically disengage from the news as best I can because there was a time or a day, I think this might have been like 2022 or something like that. We were on the heels of COVID and things still were not looking great. Home loan rates were like through the roof and like things just weren't feeling great. Fast food prices were like, we were already seeing inflation and like fast food prices that were going up to a ridiculous level. And I remember I was, like, doom scrolling, where I had a headline popped up, and it said this was back in 2022. It was like, "Meteor XY0089L, has a good chance to hit Earth in the next 60 days," or something like that. And I remember reading that, and my first gut reaction was like, of course, yeah, great." So we have, on top of all, like, the despair in the world, here's this meteor that is going to hit us and destroy us. But actually, on the other hand, I had a light bulb moment. I thought, "Oh my gosh," like, I guess I put on my business hat for once, and I realized, man, these people, and I'm not talking about anyone in particular, but people have discovered how deeply engaging despairing news is, how profitable it is, how, we don't really care about I mean, we sometimes care like on a random like social media binge, but like the puppy that's rescued underneath the bridge that was homeless, it's a feel good story, but you want to know like where the clicks are? It's the meteor. It's everything's burning, everything's being destroyed, everything's melting down. All of this stuff is so deeply profitable for the companies that post it and produce it. And it's sort of how our economy works, and that the things that generate revenue often get promoted within reason. I'm not not really talking about like illegal, illicit, like drug opportunities, but for the most part, things that generate revenue, we as people often look for. Now, how do I scale that to ridiculous levels and sometimes in very immoral and unethical ways? This is like when you see a company that like offshores its employees, or they take their production elsewhere, or they get caught like paying too little or what have you. I mean, when we find a way to make money, there are many organizations that will take that to extremes just to keep profits as high as possible. So I had this light bulb moment and I was like, "Oh my gosh, like I've got to disengage a little bit. I've got to withdraw a little bit." And not isolate, but just understand that I don't know if we were ever intended to be part of a 24-hour news cycle that is so diligently committed to doom and gloom and the end of the world, essentially. I just don't know if we were ever meant for something like that. And I will say something potentially fairly challenging. This might cause a couple people to click off the podcast, but as someone who is a Christian, I don't know if God intended for us to be so deeply committed to the news. I think some people, the way I've heard it described is, it's my Christian obligation to be in the know and involved. And while I think there is some truth to that, I don't know if God intended it to the level that I've seen some people execute their diligence and fandom about certain political things. So, all that to say, talking about tariffs today, here's what I will say. I'm not going to be one of those guys. I think this was so funny. Wasn't funny. This was actually really terrible. But whenever Israel, and I've talked about this elsewhere too, whenever Israel, Palestine, Gaza, all that stuff was happening, the thing that was really funny to me is, and this actually did happen, was I had someone ask, he said, "Hey, so what's your take on the Israel Palestine stuff?" And I go, "Dude, I am a random podcaster, random business guy out of Arkansas. Like, I wouldn't know the first thing about international politics. I don't know the first thing. Now, do I have some certain gut responses? Do I have certain immediate reactions? Absolutely. But what was so funny to me during the time of when all of that was sort of like at a fever pitch is the number of experts, air quote, experts posting and a lot of times like young 20-something-year-olds on TikTok and Instagram. Now, here's what's really going on. Let's talk about what's really happened. And I have to imagine that there are, PhD, like political scientists who have spent 60-year careers who are balking at this. I don't know what do we call this, by the way? Like maybe this is a term that I'm just not familiar with. What do we call someone who, for the sake of social media, I mean, it's more than just being an influencer. It is because I see it on like these clips that get put up that are from relatively small channels. So I don't think it about I don't really necessarily lump it in with, oh, it's what's being an influencer is. I don't think that's the case. But it's this very intriguing social media phenomenon of, because I have a social media account and because I created a 6-minute, here's what's really happening on X situation video, now I'm an expert. And I shared this with Joy, this really funny, and this is my wife is vegan. So if you are this is like, I'm butchering how you would describe it. If you're food conscious, if you are, you'd call yourself a little bit of a health nut. Okay. So I'm going to rag on you just for a second. I don't mean it personal. I'm just teasing. My wife's vegan. She's into all the health stuff. So you can know this is coming from a place of just genuine teasing. But I sent my wife an Instagram reel that I thought was hilarious. She thought it was hilarious too. I feel like I'm like so nervous to give this example because like, how dare you? So I sent this reel to her, and it was this guy who was like trying to decide what to eat for breakfast. And he like was sitting down, he was like pouring like milk into his cereal, and he like flicked on his phone and was like pretending he was reading an article. And then there was like a voiceover that was like, "Don't eat milk with your cereal. It contains hypo whatever, and that causes cancer." And he was like, "Oh," and he takes the cereal and he like pours it out. And then he like goes over to like a slice of bread and begins slicing the bread. And it's like, "Don't eat bread. It's high in glyphosates or, which I've heard this word so much, by the way. I'm just looking for an opportunity to drop this out on a podcast episode. So he's like, oh my gosh. And he like tosses that out. And then he like looks around and he like grabs yogurt. It's like, don't eat yogurt. The bacteria is actually hyper blitzed in a, incinerator, whatever to keep it. I mean, this makes no sense. It's totally, you guys who love your yogurt, you're like, you're an idiot. That makes no sense. But I'm also just making this up off the top of my head. But point being, the dude finally, like, throws up his hands, and he's like, "Okay, I guess I just won't eat anything," because like, literally every option, many of which that were, like, arguably healthy, there was an issue with it. And, like, that's such, like, a microcosm of our social media culture today is even when things are better than the alternative, which is actually how the clip ends, it ends with him just being like, "Forget it," and he's eating, like, Lay's potato chips. And, like, even when we're making better decisions than that, there is still, like, "You wanna know what's really going on? You wanna know what's really happening? Or here's what's actually." It's exhausting. It's so exhausting to keep up with all of it, all of the news, and again, I don't think we were intended for it. I talk about this because I have seen various headlines on both ends of the political aisle on here's why tariffs will ruin the economy. And I've seen headlines on, the last time that tariffs were used, the Great Depression. I saw a headline JP Morgan Stanley is predicting that we're more likely to go towards a global recession than not. I'm like, great. you know, and then I see other headlines that are like, here's why tariffs will make small businesses boom. And I'm like, give me a break, everybody. Give me a break. Like, seriously, it's like if you want to find the headline that feeds into your narrative, you will find it. So, all this to say, I want to just cut through the noise, cut through the chatter. Let's talk small business owner to other small business owner. It would be naive of me to say that these things do not matter and they do not affect your business. I think sometimes there's a little bit of a misconception that because something is outside your control, that it is not something in that is impactful. So last year, we talked about a difficult economy. We talked about people who were, tightening the belt buckle, whatever the metaphor is. And one of the things that I talked about was, hey, you can't control a lot of this stuff. You can't control much of this stuff. So why agonize over it? And as I was talking about this with someone else, the person was like, you're right. This stuff doesn't affect me. And I was like, well, no. I didn't say that. I didn't say it doesn't affect you. It does affect you. However, what you have the most control over is not those things. So what I'm getting at is that often what happens, how we spend our time and attention is agonizing over these things we can't control. This is human nature, by the way. This isn't just with business. This is if you've ever found yourself anxiously thinking about your kids' future. I mean, I literally just talked about it. Kids' future, where you're what retirement will be like for you 40 years from now. I mean, there's so many things that vie for our attention that ultimately do not have the presence. They don't have the urgency of action in that it's like the old expression, don't worry about tomorrow because tomorrow will worry about itself, I guess. Again, I'm horrible with these metaphor saying that maybe that's not even the right way to put it. But there are things that can deeply affect you. There are things that are sometimes deeply beneficial and deeply harmful for you. My advice today is not to assume that that is not true. My advice today is we have to drill down and focus on what you can control. This is not anti politics. This is not telling you that you shouldn't be vocal or an advocate in the things that you care about. And you know what? I'm going to expand that. The things your neighbor cares about. I think it would be beneficial if we were more community oriented in in this country. I said country in this company. I think the things that affect your neighbor should absolutely be something that's of interest to you. I mean, literally, it's if we're talking about God in this podcast, it is something deeply biblical. It is something of deep interest to the kingdom of God that you think about those other than yourself. It's actually in the Bible. So, by all means, be politically active and an advocate and vocal and what have you. And when it comes to your business and growing your business, there are some things that should be of immediate action for you. And I'm going to hand out a few of them today. While these things, like tariffs, ultimately will affect your business, I'm not going to say good or bad. Right now, it's not looking good. I mean, the stock market's not looking great. The Dow's not looking great. But regardless of whatever direction, like maybe this is some deep brain play, and I'm not going to give you the here's what's really happening. When we look at the history of I have no idea. I'm so unqualified to give you a historical breakdown on the efficiency and effectiveness of tariffs on a global scale and how it affects countrywide economies. I could not be more unqualified to talk about this, and shame on those of you who read a random headline and then repeat it to others as if you are the expert. So I'm unqualified to talk about that. What I am qualified to talk about is making money in your business. At the end of the day, what is of immediate action for you? It would be a mistake to spend the next 4 or 5 days looking at the markets, looking at what's green, what's red, looking and learning about tariffs. That would be a mistake for you in your small business. What would be of most importance to you is looking at your lead funnel, thinking about where are my customers coming from, thinking about who you're selling to, and most importantly, this is less of an action point, this is more of a mental point, not letting what's in the news affect your expectations for your business. More importantly, not letting it affect how you sell, how you talk to your customers. I mean, here's what I have learned, like back during COVID, there was this sentiment that every business was failing, every business was struggling. And again, we're not ignoring the impact of COVID on a multitude of businesses and businesses that have closed since then. However, I'll never forget, I was sitting down, I was in a business meeting with a customer of mine, and the CEO was talking to, I was on the call, and so were a number of this business owner's employees, large business, $200 million business, I guess. And he said, I think actually 200 employees, so whatever millions of dollars in business, excuse me. And he goes, yeah, we just had the best year we've ever had on the books. This is at the end of 2020, or maybe this was 2021. Somebody was making money, and not in an unethical or sketchy way. Somebody's making money. There was a month I had, or a few months, that at the time were like the best months I'd ever had with good advice. Since then, I've had substantially higher months. I mean, my business has only grown significantly since COVID. It's only grown significantly since COVID. And which is a bit funny since the premise of this whole episode was doom and gloom. But in particular, I think this was like back in 2022, I had a few months that were just like particularly outstanding. And including that, I had sold some really good advertising packages on the podcast. Well, I had a friend of my wife's ask this question like, "Hey, how's Blake doing?" And Joe was like, "Well, what do you mean?" And she was like, "Well, I mean, no one's buying anything right now." It's like, how's he doing? And she shared that with me, knowing that I had closed some pretty large deals. And it was nothing, no out of disrespect to the friend. It was just like, yeah, like it's funny how the news dictates how people view business and how business is done. Which brings me back to my point to you. It would be a mistake to throw up your hands and give up or say it's not in my control, or worse, you don't close that deal and it's like, yeah, because of tariffs. I mean, maybe it could be tariffs, but maybe because you blew the sale. Maybe someone didn't buy from you because you didn't give a compelling enough display of the value of the services that you provide. I mean, it's, and again, it's not, we're not going to be ignorant that people don't think twice about buying decisions when times are hard, that people think about where their dollars, like all of that stuff is very true. However, it is often things, again, out of your control. If you're going to run a successful business when times are apparently very difficult, you have to be deeply, deeply committed to the ownership of your business and being as candid and honest with yourself as possible as to what's going well and what's not going well. And more than anything, ensuring that your attention and your focus is on significantly growing the brand, on growing the revenue, on doing better business. And more importantly, this is not really a small business concept, but this is something we see in much larger corporations. Really making sure the value is there. Really making sure a lot of these larger corporations get by with so much. Like, I'll give you a really great example. I had to, we're rolling our SEO service into a separate domain. It's going to be a marketing domain just to keep the good advice, the consulting domain whole. If that makes sense. Well, I was grabbing a Google email, Google Workspace, and I clicked like create a new account because I needed to tie it to this domain. And it gave me one option. It said, you'd be a great fit for Business Plan Pro or something. And it was like $30 a month. And I thought, what, $30 for an email? What? I feel like in the past, I've paid like 6 or 7 bucks or something. Like, this is what's going on here? But there were no other options and there were no see other plans or what. I was just like, I was confused. I was like, why is this the only option? So I went ahead and there was a free trial button. I clicked that because I knew if I got into my account settings, I could downgrade my plan. So I get in, I click the free trial, I get into my account. Sure enough, it shows me all the things that I have. It's like Google AI, Google uh, video meets for up to this many people, all this stuff that I didn't need. I click downgrade plan, and literally the one that was just email, which is all that I needed, was I think $7 a month. And I thought that's all I want. It's just click on that. Corporations are really able to get by with some, I don't know about this, these tactics that really don't focus on customer value. They focused on business revenue, and these things are sometimes directly opposed. See, Google doesn't offer all the business plans on one page because they know that most customers are going to click the bottom option, and there were like 4 or 5 choices here, or maybe somewhere in the middle. They're not going to choose the $30 a month plan. So what Google's then thinking is, let's just show only this option, which is great for our revenue. It's not great for the customer. It's not always the right answer for the customer. So you're going to see corporations really start to think about, okay, what are we doing that is always prioritizing our revenue, and how do we make sure that we're prioritizing customer value? Or rather, some companies will do that. Some won't, and they'll just go out of business. I mean, we're going to see companies, and I don't want to get super in the weeds on it, but like Intel, which was known. I mean, it was the most well-known associated brand for CPUs for computers, and they've been outdone and replaced by AMD. I think really mostly AMD has the majority of it, but there might be other companies in there. So we're seeing in real time companies who were the main thing becoming not the main thing. And this is often around not understanding the difference between customer value and company revenue. Now, ironically, when you really go in on customer value, long term, you build stable customers, happy customers, and it makes you more money down the road. Unfortunately, for like publicly traded companies, it's not super compelling for your investors to say, yeah, we're going to make a lot of money in 10 years. They want to make a lot of money this quarter, a lot of money this year, and many of the decisions reflect that. But for you as the small business owner, you don't have to worry about any of that stuff. You got to just focus on the customers. Focusing on value does not mean lowering your prices. It doesn't mean lowering your prices. It might actually mean raising your prices and delivering a better quality product. And in fact, that's really what I'm even getting at is going all in on value. We're not talking Walmart value. We're not talking about rolling back prices. We're talking about really making sure that what you deliver is high quality, that it's effective, that it does what it says it will do. And even in difficult economic times, you will find people will still continue to pay for those services because even when times are hard, people still will pay for quality. Now, you may not, again, we're not ignoring the effect. You may find yourself, whereas before you were closing 1 in every 5 conversations, you may find yourself, you know what? It's the nature of I gotta call 7 people instead of 5. I'm closing every 7th call. I'm closing every 8th call. I'm getting different objections. I'm getting people who are saying, having different problems. I'm having customers who are asking for more flexible payment terms. Like all of this stuff is absolutely part of the equation, but you can't get bogged down and you can't get disillusioned and you can't get lost in the negative news and allow it to frame your business. People are just like that company in 2020. People will make money over the next 6 to 9 months. And it won't just be super rich people or, whatever headlines you read. This is all a scheme to get super rich people more wealthy. I mean, I'd say don't focus on any of that. Understand there are small businesses who will be making good money over this next year. And I plan Good Advice to be one of those. I plan for Good Advice to be one of those companies as best as I can. I'm not a genius. I'm not an absolute. I'm never free of mistakes. Who knows? Maybe I make an awful mistake in the next 6 months and drive my business into the ground. I hope that's not the case. I will say up to this point, I've had the best 12 months in Good Advice history. Things have gone very well, and I'm planning absolutely to keep that going. So anyway, all of that put out there, I wish you well for your business. Hang in there. Hang in there. Try to surround yourself with positive people. If you're around a bunch of doomers, you might need a new friends group. You might need to rub shoulders with some other business owners who are, yep, this stuff's happening, but I'm focusing on making money. I'm focusing on providing quality to my customers, focusing on growing the business, growing the brand, having ambition. You might have to change your circle a little bit. So anyway, that brings us to the end of today's podcast episode. How do we do skating by the political side of it, huh? Like I just kind of touched on it a little bit, It's about as far as we will go on the show in terms of politics. Which again, if you love politics, I'm sorry that we won't really get much more into it than that. And if you hate politics, you're probably like, oh, thank goodness, like that's all I want to hear. So, anywho, thank you so much for listening to the show today. I really appreciate it. That's all we got. Don't forget, you can always support the podcast on our Patreon, patreon.com/goodadvice. Or if you're a business owner and you want to advertise on the show, you can always reach out, blake@goodadvicecoaching.com. Thanks so much to all those who support the show. That's today's Good Advice. Catch you later. See ya.